Previously on the Mistress of Fire. Who is this witch that you speak of?
She's a demon that breathes fire. Before we even knew it, half of us went up in flames. She told us that if we ever decided to come back, she would come to the village and burn it to the ground.
Enough! If you value your life, you have never seen us. The party marched towards their new destination. Sir, the fog is greatly thickened. We should proceed very carefully, said one of the horsemen's subordinates while approaching the high-ranking officer. It's a perfect place to lay traps or stage an ambush. I'm fully aware of it, said the officer. Maintain a close formation around Her Imperial Majesty. Sir. The horseman slowed his pacing until he reached the Empress's side. After a few hours riding up the hill, the fog had become dense to the point that the close surroundings were no longer visible, and it was difficult for the party to pinpoint their current location. Nevertheless, withdrawal was not an option. The Empress was determined to obtain what she came for. Suddenly, very distinct humanoid shapes pierced the fog ahead. At their sight, the horsemen stopped on their tracks. The shapes slowly released themselves from the fog's grasp. It's a warning, said the horseman guarding the left flank of the Empress. Wooden poles had been nailed in a straight line. Animal skulls were hanged at different heights. Some of them were human. The high-ranking officer glared over the poles. They were made in a crudely manner, portraying its builder as a cold and ruthless individual. Let us continue, said the officer. Stay vigilant. The poles were placed a few meters from each other, allowing the horsemen to pass through them. However, they saw unfit for their Empress to be in the presence of such unsightly, ominous objects. As a result, they inspected them to make sure that no dangerous contraptions were attached to them, and then proceeded to dismantle the poles one by one. Once they were done, they reported it to the Empress, who was sitting on a luxurious foldable chair made from Titan wood that the officer had taken from the Empress's carriage. Then the officer helped the Empress mount her horse. He bent his knee along with his fellow subordinates while performing a courteous salute. She waved her hand graciously outwards, and in response, the soldiers swiftly mounted their horses and the party resumed its journey. Curiously, as they further marched up the hill, the fog became progressively clearer. They could now see the height at which they stood since they started marching. Without a doubt, a careless step would mean certain death. Suddenly, an explosion occurred, this time much closer. Trees trembled, bushes swayed violently, the ground shook beneath their feet. A powerful gale reached the riders, which greatly startled their horses. The Empress's mount got out of control and galloped towards the right side of the woods, closing every second onto the rocky ledge. The Empress tried to seize control, but the horse refused to submit. As the horse and its rider were about to reach their untimely demise, a rider intercepted them from the left side. It was the officer. He grabbed the other horse's reins and exclaimed strong but soothing sounds. The horse's rampaging attitude turned to agitation, which in turn became complete calmness. The officer dismounted. My most humble apologies, Your Imperial Majesty. I shall take complete responsibility of this incident, said the officer while kneeling. The Empress watched him silently from her high position and then said, Once we are back at the palace, you are to dispose of this horse and receive 40 lashes. The officer slightly lifted his head so he could see his horse with the top corner of his eyes. I fully accept your punishment, replied the officer. He then saluted and proceeded to mount his current horse and marched without looking back. The Empress's well-being was of the utmost importance.
To endanger her would be to endanger the mandate of heaven. If the slightest of wounds were to appear on her immaculate skin, their honor would be tarnished beyond repair. But there was a silver lining to it. The explosion had allowed the officer to figure out how close they were to the witch's hideout. He raised his arm in front of him while looking at the Empress, as if he was waiting for her permission. The Empress replied, "Bring me the witch." The two bodyguards left the Empress's side and advanced with a slightly quicker pace into the deep woods. The officer and the Empress followed them shortly after. Barely minutes had passed, and the horsemen had gotten out of the woods. The air was heavy and filled with a strong smell of smoke. In front of them was an old wooden medium-sized cabin. The building's crudeness resembled that of the poles the party had stumbled upon. While the Empress and the leading officer watched between the outer trees of the woods, the horsemen circled slowly around the cabin. They kept a considerable distance between them so they could watch for any possible blind spots. They noticed that behind the house there was a giant dark spot covered with irregular burned patches of grass. Furthermore, strange vials, tubes, and spherical contraptions were spread around the location. The smell was stronger at the rightmost part, where smoke was still coming out of the ground. The bodyguards dismounted their horses, unsheathed their swords, and approached the cabin's entrance. One of the soldiers had a thick scar that went from his left temple down to his chin, going over the corner of his lip. He looked for any signs of movement in the cabin while his sworn brother lied in wait, and then gave a quick kick that widely opened the door. The inside of the cabin was nearly pitch black. Contrary to the noxious smell outside, there was a slight hint of incense. "She's here," uttered the scarred warrior. The warrior's steps creaked the wood below them as they entered the cabin. Muffled footsteps could be heard across the cabin. It was difficult to ascertain their location. The wind was howling through the cracks of the wooden walls. The warriors stayed vigilant as they advanced. Without warning, a high-pitched whistle cut through the air, passing by the scarred warrior's ear and ending in a hollow sound behind him. He checked on his sworn brother. He had his hand on the side of the neck. He was grasping a thin, needle-looking object. The scarred warrior quickly turned towards the darkness. He knew the next dart was inbound and he had no way of escaping it. He squinted his eyes and focused his hearing while keeping his blade high and close to him. He was able to distinguish a faint light coming from a few meters away, and when he least expected it, another dart flew towards him. But this time he had managed to hear the shadowy figure exhale. He quickly positioned his sword in a diagonal position, covering most of his head, neck, and his torso's vital points. The experienced warrior managed to deflect the dart in time. He knew now it was the time to make a choice. He could pursue the figure by delving into the darkness, but he knew it was very dangerous since the individual knew his surroundings better and he could use that against him. His sworn brother hit the ground really hard. His eyes were widely open. The wooden planks holding his body were moist from his sweat. His body muscles were contracting abnormally. Without a second thought, the warrior quickly charged towards the entrance. He calculated that he would have enough time to disappear from the aggressor's line of sight before he could prepare the next dart. He was almost right. The dart caught the warrior in his left calf at the last moment. However, he managed to get out of the cabin before stumbling and falling to his knee. He heard the muffled footsteps again. This time they were moving away. The warrior's body was feeling heavier by each passing second. He mustered all of his remaining strength and yelled, "My lord, the witch is coming towards you! She's using poison darts!" As he finished uttering the last word of his sentence,
The figure athletically vaulted the window on the leftmost side of the cabin and sprinted on a straight line towards the officer and the Empress. Her Imperial Majesty shall suffer no harm from this savage. The commanding officer leaned forward like a hungry hawk. He quickly gripped his horse with his legs and started to canter menacingly towards his opponent. I hope you liked this video. If you would like me to make more videos of this kind, please leave a comment below. And also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And remember, it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, you're always welcome here.